Hi, we're Ariel.
And Michelle, and we're the Board Game
Tutors.
Tutors.
And
Today we're going to be doing our Advanced Concepts video for the Deep Dwarves Faction from the Summoner Wars Master Set. So let's get started. This right here is the card that shows you your starting setup for this deck, and so we see the summoner and the different units that we have on the board. So you're going to follow that to get started when you set up at the beginning of the game. So if we turn that card over, that shows us all the event cards, which we're going to be talking about in this video. And it also gives you your turn phase summary, which just tells you what you do on every turn. Okay, here we have a wall. And in every faction, the walls have the exact same function, so we don't need to spend time focusing on the walls, but that's what your wall looks like. Okay, so our summoner for the Deep Dwarves is Tundle. And we can see on the card, Ariel, if you want to point for me, there's the attack value is 2, which means you roll 2 dice whenever you attack. And you have a ranged attack, so you can attack units that are within 3 spaces. And Tundle has 6 hit points, so he needs to get hit successfully 6 times before he dies. His special ability is called Meditate. So I'll go ahead and read that. At the beginning of your attack phase, you may remove 1 card from the top of your discard pile and place it face down on top of your magic pile. You can only attack with 1 unit on a turn that you use Meditate. So this ability happens, as it says, at the beginning of your attack phase. That's when you need to think of doing it. And it refers to, so yeah, there we go. Your attack phase is step 5 in the turn phase summary. And so the ability Meditate refers to 2 different piles that you have. You've got your magic pile and your discard pile. So in this case, you would be taking a card from your discard pile, like imagine if that wall was in your discard pile, and moving it to your magic pile, which means you basically get to reuse it for magic.
actually, it would be face up like this. Sorry, I screwed up there for a second. And so it would be like this in your discard pile, because once you use a card, it's face up in your discard. And then if you use Meditate with this deck, you would take that card and flip it over and put it under your magic pile.
So essentially you're getting to reuse a card that you've already used for magic. And that can be really helpful because the Deep Dwarves actually rely a lot on using magic, probably more than any other faction in the Master set.
And so the one basic disadvantage about this is you can only attack with 1 unit on a turn that you use Meditate. So if you're trying to be conservative on a particular turn and you don't want to really go on the offensive, and like maybe you only have Tundle and 1 other unit on the board, you might attack with that 1 unit because Tundle is like safe in your back row. And to benefit even more from that, you can take something out of your discard and put it into your magic pile. But that would be not something you do every turn, but something you use on case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that's Tundle's special ability. Now we're going to talk about all of Tundle's common units. So first we have the Scholar. Now the Scholars can be a little complicated to understand, but now that we understand them, we've realized it's not as confusing as it sounds. So Scholars actually come with a 0 attack value, which means on their own they can't actually roll any dice until you activate their special ability, which we'll talk about in a moment. But first, it costs 1 magic point to summon them. And they're melee fighters, and you'll also notice they have 3 hit points, so they can last a bit longer than a lot of commons. Now the special ability for a Scholar is called Insight. Once per turn, if you control 1 or more Scholars, you may spend 1 magic point. Until the end of that turn, when a unit you control attacks, add 1 to its attack value if there are 1 or more friendly Scholars adjacent to the card that is being attacked. So one thing that's really important about the special ability is that it applies to the Scholar. So the Scholar doesn't immediately have any attack value, but once you pay a magic point, then the Scholar will have an attack value of 1 for any unit that he's adjacent to. And of course, he's a melee fighter, so he always has to be adjacent to someone before he can attack. And then he also improves the attack value of anyone nearby him. So we're going to show an example of that. We've got a Scholar. And there also might be another Scholar involved in this situation. We're going to use that to help us demonstrate how this works. And then say we have a Miner as well.
Okay, we'll have 1 enemy Miner for this example.
Okay.
And 1 friendly Miner, for example.
Okay, so here, if you've paid 1 magic point, and it says once per turn, right? So you can do this anytime. You can pay that magic anytime during your turn. It's not at a specific point. But once you've spent that magic, then So each of these scholars and the miner is going to have an additional die added to their attack value. So the scholar, this first scholar, he's going to be able to roll 1 die. We can show that. Okay, that was successful. The other scholar is also going to roll 1 die. That was not successful. And then this miner can now roll 2 dice, whereas normally he could roll 1. And he got a successful hit. So they would have killed that enemy miner in the middle. So it's important to note that here we spent 1 magic point, and that boosted this scholar to have 1 additional die, this scholar to have 1 additional die, and this miner to have 1 additional die. So
yeah, so it doesn't matter how many scholars are adjacent to the enemy unit. You only add 1 die.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, in order to keep this straight, if there is a scholar next to an enemy unit, that scholar and anybody who can also attack that same card, for example, gem mages, which we'll talk about in a minute, they're ranged fighters.
Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't have to be adjacent in order to attack.
So, for example, this miner was out of the way, and this gem mage was here. He's a ranged fighter, so he normally rolls 2 dice. Because of this scholar's presence, he would now be able to roll 3. And also you have to pay for the special ability. So that's that.
Okay. And all of those extra attacks extra attack values came about with the use of 1 magic point.
Right.
So that can be quite valuable if your units are in the right position to make that happen.
Yeah, you obviously have to think very carefully about positioning to make that work correctly.
All right, next we're going to talk about the common unit called miners. So they cost 1 magic to summon, they have an attack value of 1, they're melee fighters, and they have 2 hit points. And this is the miner's special ability. At the beginning of your movement phase, you may spend 1 magic point. So again, we see the theme of spending magic in this deck. If you do so, when a miner moves during that movement phase, instead of moving it normally, you may place it adjacent to any other miner that you control. So you pay this magic at the beginning of your movement phase, and then it basically allows you to do a special movement in place of your normal movement. So if we wanted to move this miner that's here on this side of the board, say we had another
miner here. Mm-hmm. So during his regular movement, it says you have to pay 1 magic point at the beginning of your movement phase. You have to remember that. You pay your magic out of your magic pile, 1 movement, 1 magic point. Then this miner, for example, would go forward 2 spaces during his movement phase. So he could attack that scholar, enemy scholar in this example. Then this second miner, the one that was behind and couldn't possibly reach those guys, now, since we've paid our 1 magic and put it in our discard, now this miner can tunnel and go all the way here or here. But in this instance, you probably want to bring your miner over here, so that way both of these miners can attack the 2 enemy units. It's not going to happen very often that you'll have 2 enemy units right next to each other where you can take advantage of the tunnel ability on these miners, but that's one example of how you might use it. Another example might be, for example, let's pretend this scholar was the enemy summoner, and let's start out at the beginning of the turn again. So right here, you can see here, this miner, let's pay our 1, for example, if we paid our 1 magic out of the magic pile, put it in our discard, now we can use tunnel. First, this miner goes forward 2 spaces, 1, 2. Now, this miner, who has seemingly no chance of reaching the enemy quote-unquote summoner, can now use the tunnel ability to go all the way over here. And now you can sneak in 1 die roll against your enemy quote-unquote summoner. And now you got 1 attack in that the enemy was not foreseeing would take place.
All right. We've also noticed these miners are just helpful in terms of the fact that they do have 2 hit points, so they can last longer than the next unit, which we're going to talk about, which is gem mages. So over time with playing this deck, we've actually started to use miners a little bit more than we did initially, because we've found them to be more helpful than we first thought. Because at first we weren't sure if that tunnel ability was terribly helpful, but there are times you can use it, and then also just being able to use them as a sturdy unit that can roll 1 die and that has to be hit twice before it's destroyed.
Okay.
Okay, so now on to the third common unit, which is called a gem mage. So these gem mages are the most powerful of the commons in terms of the fact that they roll 2 dice for their attack. They cost 2 magic cards to summon, and they have a ranged attack. And then they only have 1 hit point. So you're basically getting a trade-off that you can roll 2 dice, which is quite powerful, but then they do die pretty quickly. So let's look at their special ability, which again involves spending magic. It's called Gem Magic. At the beginning of your attack phase, you may spend 1 magic point to add 1 to this gem mage's attack value until the end of the turn. At the end of your attack phase, you may spend 1 magic point to place this gem mage adjacent to a wall that you control. So we kind of have 2 special abilities wrapped into one here. So first, at the beginning of your attack phase, you would spend 1 magic.
So let's pretend this miner is in our magic pile, like so. And you spent it at the beginning of your attack phase. That's important. You have to keep track of that. And that goes into your discard now. Now this gem mage could roll 3 dice in this instance.
That's a very powerful attack.
And then also, let's say the gem mage is over here, but he's really close to your enemy side, and you really don't want him to stay there because, like we said, he only has 1 hit point. So if you spend at the end of your attack phase 1 magic point out of your magic, now you can basically make him retreat, and he can come all the way back here next to this wall. So that way he's not in harm's way anymore. Or even better, if the wall was here, he could go behind the wall. Yeah.
Okay, so those are the gem mage's 2 special abilities. Okay, now on to the champions. First we have Sprog. He rolls 2 dice. He costs 6 magic to summon. He has a ranged attack, and he has 6 hit points. This is his special ability. It's called Restructure. At the end of your turn, you may spend 1 magic point to place a wall that is adjacent to Sprog on any empty space that is within 2 spaces of Sprog. You cannot place a friendly wall onto an opponent's side of the battlefield using this ability. So, as you can kind of see in the picture here, Sprog is quite strong and can do a lot with walls. So, in this ability, he can basically just grab a wall and move it. And so here's an example of how that could work.
Let's say you had your wall here and Sprog was here. So you have to spend 1 magic point. If you do spend 1 magic point, you can place a wall adjacent to Sprog. It has to be next to him. Diagonal does not count as adjacent. And you can move that onto any empty space within 2 spaces of Sprog. So let's say you put this wall here on this turn, and on an earlier turn, but you really realized, oh, that's not really the best placement of that wall. I want that wall in a more forward position so I can do a better job at bringing the fight to the enemy army. So if you spend 1 magic point, then you can move this wall any space within 2 spaces of Sprog. So any space within 2 spaces. So you can go here, here, you can go here, here, you can go here, here. You can't go here because that's within 3 spaces.
To the left.
To the left. You could go 1, 2, etc. You can move it back if you wanted to, but let's say you wanted to move it to a forward position. You can move it 1, 2 spaces. So that way you go 1, 2. And that's really important because now you have a wall where you can summon someone on the enemy side of the battlefield. And that could be a really useful skill. You could also use this to move enemy walls around the board. Yeah, it's kind of hard to orchestrate that. You have to make sure he doesn't die. There's several factors that are involved there. So, yeah.
And as the card mentions, you can't put your own wall onto the opponent's side of the board, which makes sense because you can never summon a wall or place a wall on the opponent's side of the board. That would be probably too overpowered because then you could get new units super close to the enemy's summoner. All right, so that's Sprog. Our next champion is named Lun, champion of the Deep Dwarves. So he costs 4 magic to summon. He rolls 3 dice when he attacks. He has a melee attack, and he has just 4 hit points, so that's pretty low for a champion. And his ability is called Gem of Calling. Once per turn, after moving Lun, you may spend 1 magic point to choose any common unit within 4 spaces of Lun. Place the chosen unit adjacent to Lun. So essentially what you're doing here is moving a common unit. This could be yours or an enemy common unit. You're moving it closer to Lun.
And you have to spend a magic point for it, obviously. So, for example...
And you do need to move him first. That's an important point. So
Right.
that's when this happens.
So let's say if one started out his turn here, and then he moved forward one. Oh, let me move something closer first. Okay, so let's pretend this enemy scholar is an enemy. The scholar is an enemy scholar, and let's pretend this scholar is also an enemy scholar. Um, Basically, either of these people are within range. They're common units, so they fall under the criteria here, and they're within 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see his Gem of Calling ability really reaches all over the board. You just have to count out 4 spaces away. And so you can take either one of these scholars and move them anywhere next to him. And then he can use his 3 dice and just whack away at the enemy units. Usually they don't have 3 hit points, but yeah. It's really useful in terms of if, for example, the enemy summoner is using his common units to shield himself from your attack, then you can just grab that common unit, yank it out from underneath him, and put it right next to Lund so he can take him out, and possibly use someone else to help you take out that common unit.
All right. And then the third champion is Kinder. He rolls 2 dice. He costs 5 magic to summon. He's a melee fighter, and he has 6 hit points. So let's read his special ability. Mage Push. Once per turn, at any time during your turn, you may spend 1 magic point to choose a unit within 2 spaces of Kinder. Move the chosen unit up to 2 spaces. Kinder cannot be moved using Mage Push. So he can't use this on himself, but aside from that, he can spend 1 magic, and then that allows him to move any unit that's close enough to him up to 2 spaces from where it started. So again, as you can see, this deck is very magic heavy, so you use a lot of magic, and it has quite a few ways that you can move people around, or you can move walls with the other guy.
Especially because there are no limitations, because it says choose a unit. So that could be an enemy summoner, it could be your summoner, it could be your champion, it could be an enemy champion, it could be enemy commons, it could be your commons. Basically, it's anybody. The only thing he cannot move with Mage Push is a wall, because that's Sprague's ability to move walls around.
Yeah, so a wall is not referred to as a unit.
So, on a given turn, if you... Here, move that. If Kinder... It says here... you may spend 1 magic point to choose a unit within 2 spaces of Kinder. So, let's say, for example, I wanted to move Lun. So, you could use 1 magic point and use Mage Push, because Lund is within 2 spaces, 1, 2, of Kinder. You could move him 2 spaces across the board, and then during your movement phase, Lund could move another 2 spaces. So literally, he can get to the other side of the board if you plan it correctly. And then rolling 3 dice at an enemy summoner is always a scary prospect for the enemy summoner.
That's right.
And like we said, it doesn't matter what unit you could use. You could even push Tundle that way if you wanted to, but that's not necessarily the smartest choice, because then you're putting Tundle in danger.
All right. So now we've gone through all the common units and the champion units, so now we're going to talk about the event cards. Here we have Magic Torrent. You may spend 1 or more magic points. For each magic point spent, you may place 1 wound marker on a common or champion enemy unit that is within 4 spaces of your summoner. No unit can receive more than 1 wound marker from this event. So this can be especially helpful toward the end of the game, or basically any time where your opponent is really starting to crowd in on your summoner, Tundle. So yeah, this specifically applies to units that are within 4 spaces of your summoner. So it's a way that he can protect himself. And so here we're getting an example set up.
And 4 spaces away is a really useful characteristic, because like you can put wounds on anybody within 4 spaces, which we demonstrated before with Lun. 4 spaces is a really large area of the board. So for example, this miner is 2 spaces away, so you could spend 1 magic point using Magic Torrent to put 1 wound on this miner. So he's not dead yet, but now Tundle is that much more equipped to kill him. If you want to, you can keep on going as long as you have the magic to do so. So here we count 1, 2, 3 spaces away. If you spent another magic point, you can put a wound on that miner, and then if you count 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces away, you can put a wound on that scholar too. So it's the limitation is you can only put one wound on one enemy unit. So you gotta use it wisely. Sometimes you'll use it to finish off people, and if you do finish them off, let's say for example that miner already had one hit point missing, and you add a second, that is the equivalent of destroying him, and now he would go into your magic pile.
Mm-hmm. So yep, this is an event that can actually let you destroy other units and use them as magic.
Okay.
Okay, so that was Magic Torrent. And now we're going to talk about Summoning Surge. Choose an opponent. If you have fewer units on the battlefield than that opponent does, you may remove up to 3 cards from your discard pile and place them on top of your magic pile. You may summon units during this event phase. So it says choose an opponent because there is a way of playing a 3 or 4 player game, and in that case, you would be choosing one of your opponents. But in a lot of cases, you're going to be playing a 2-player game, and so of course you only have one opponent to choose from. And then basically to use this card, you need to ensure that you have fewer units on the battlefield than your opponent. And then you simply would take 3 cards from your discard pile and place them on top of your magic pile.
So 1, 2, 3. And sometimes if you don't have enough, let's say you only have 2 magic in your discard pile, you can use it for 2, but the best use of it obviously is for 3, because then you get the best use out of that. And now you actually get to break the rules in terms of the turn phase, because you play Summoning Surge during your event card phase. As you can see, it's after your summoning phase. Mm-hmm. But now, after doing Summoning Surge, it gives you the ability to summon in the middle of your event card phase.
Okay, and there are 2 Summoning Surge cards, so there's sometimes when we'll find like we actually have 2 Summoning Surge cards at once, and then we can even get 6 cards back into our magic pile, which could be even more powerful. Like you might be able to actually summon a champion even at that point. Mm-hmm. All right, so that was Summoning Surge.
All right, next card.
Our next event is Illusionary Warrior. Choose a common unit that is in your magic pile. Place the chosen unit adjacent to a Deep Dwarf champion or gem mage that you control. You control the chosen unit. So here you would actually be able to choose one of your common units or one of your enemy's common units as long as they're in your magic pile. So this can be pretty interesting because you can get a card that normally wouldn't be playing in your deck and actually put it on the board for you. And another important thing to note here is that you do have to be able to summon this unit adjacent to a champion or a gem mage that belongs to you.
So in this example, we have one card in our magic pile. It says magic, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. It's a gem mage. So let's say, for example, you don't want to pay the summon 2 cost for this gem mage. You might purposefully build it as magic during phase 6 of one of your earlier turns of the game. And now it's in your magic pile. You just got to keep track that you have it in there and it's not something else. And you take this card, and let's see, let's pretend we have Kinder on the board here. So he's a gem mage champion, not gem mage. He is a champion of the Deep Dwarves. You can do this next to a champion or a gem mage, and now you can summon that card on right in front of you for free, basically. So that's another really good benefit to Illusionary Warrior. You don't have to spend that 2 magic. It's just a free card. You just have to spend the Illusionary Warrior card. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll get an enemy common unit that costs 4 magic, and yeah, that's always really nice when you can get that enemy common unit on your side of the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next event card is called Magic Stasis, and this one's pretty simple. Choose an opponent. Until the beginning of your next turn, the chosen opponent cannot spend magic points. So this is a good way to stop your opponent from summoning on the next turn or doing anything else that would involve magic points.
So whenever you see your opponent building up 5 or a hefty stack of magic cards on their side of the board, one thing that we'll do is, okay, like your opponent probably is going to summon a champion on their next turn. So during your event phase, you can spend a magic stasis card. And one way we help to help us remember what it does is we take the card and we stick it on our opponent's magic pile. So that way, before they even think, okay, I'm going to summon, oh, no, I can't because the card's on top. For this turn only, I cannot use magic. Mm-hmm. And so they can't use that. Let's say their deck used magic cards for different abilities, just like this deck uses magic cards for different abilities. Now, um, they can't.
They can't do those abilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this turn.
Okay.
Okay, finally, Wake the Father Gem. Until the end of this turn, all special abilities that cost 1 or more magic points to activate cost 1 less magic points to activate. So we saved this one for last so that we would have already told you about all the various special abilities. So this one is extremely powerful because when you play it, you can do any of those special abilities that would cost a magic for no cost on this turn. And it says they cost 1 less magic point to activate.
So they're
But
essentially free.
many of these, I think all of them probably in this
they're all
deck,
one.
they only cost 1 magic, so they actually end up not costing anything, and you can do them on this turn. So these cards are all examples of those abilities that normally cost 1 magic, and on this turn they actually wouldn't cost any magic.
The Scholar would be free, the Miner would be free, the Sprog would be free, Lun, Kinder, and the Gem Mage would also be free. So, using Wake the Father Gem, you can pull off some pretty awesome combinations. It's all very circumstantial. You have to figure out what will work at any given time, but everything here is free.
All the abilities.
Yeah.
All right, so those are all the event cards and all the cards in the deck for Tundle, the Deep Dwarf Summoner. So, yeah. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in all of our other faction videos.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.